The term creativity indicates that we can make something out of nothing. And a lot of people argue that that's ideas, right? Or thoughts. Like, we don't know where thoughts come from. But the truth of the matter is, we can't know what we can't know. So, in other words, unless we have experienced it, unless we come in contact with it, unless somebody's told us about it, communicated it, educated us about something, we can't know anything except for what our experiences allow. And that's the interesting thing, because it's such you watch children grow up and they experience things, and they're tactile beings. They're very sensory driven. When kids are babies, when people are babies, they stick everything in their face that they possibly can, because that's where their strongest sense are, the most developed. Can I eat this or can I not? It's a very simple proposition. Yes, I can stick this in my mouth. That's pretty good. No, I probably shouldn't stick that in my mouth. And as they grow, they start developing their other senses. Like, they see things way more, they notice things way more than the average person, because, like, driving in a van, per se, I see a lot of trees, a lot of signs. Like, you just see them over and over again, and so you don't pay attention to them unless you literally have to focus on them. Kids, on the other hand, take all that in. Like, I see my nephew do this all the time. Like, he sees and notices and hears things that are so observant, because it's all new. What's that? What's that? You know, like, trying to figure out all that is the world around them. Whereas the longer time you spend on things, the less you notice these things, unless you exercise that. But back to the point of creativity is, people call people creative. Oh, that's so creative and everything like that. But they're not pulling something out of nothing. They're taking these ideas, these experiences, these aptitudes, and they're assembling them in different ways. They're taking different parts of different thoughts and reassembling them. And that's the beauty of the human being, is like, we look at things not how they're supposed to be. Like, we notice the things that we're not supposed to notice, and we focus on the things that we're not supposed to focus on, but we put them together in different ways. Einstein termed it combinatory play. So you're combining things in a playful manner. And so ultimately, this is not creativity. We are not I can't go and make something appear. But I can take the things that I have known, that I've experienced, and I'll put them together in different ways. So some of these things become the means to explain things away. So emotions, particularly, like emotions are hard to articulate, but you can make imagery, metaphors that can explain these things in a manner that's coherent. So, for example, maybe you're scared of the dark, and when there's a darkness, things are hiding in there, and there's monsters, and there's all these things that are keeping us from feeling safe. So we can draw things that look like shadowy figures, or what the shadows could be. You know, it's going back to the idea of Plato's cave. You know, these people see things, these shadows dancing on the walls, and they give them names and everything, but they're all illusions. They're fabrications of the mind of what this thing that we don't really know could be. And it's ultimately not the thing. So with this, the knowledge of what is can only be experienced when truly experienced firsthand. You know, like, really experiencing. Otherwise, it becomes like this telephone game. And this is also to the credit of human beings being able to assemble ideas in different ways. Is I thought you said this, so I take the things that would make sense in that context, the things that I know, blah, 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 and I'm saying, okay, they probably said this. So if you don't know the telephone game, one person is sitting on this side, and then they're whispering to the person to their side a message of some sort. And they only get to say it once, and the person that's listening has to interpret. Like, sometimes they get the message perfectly. Other times they'll get parts of it, or they'll paraphrase it. And ultimately, by the time this message gets passed down multiple people, it's not the same message anymore. So this is what imagery does. Unless you're dealing with direct experience, it's always going to be secondhand, and these are going to be the reassembling of these ideas, and that's what most people term as creativity. But really, it's what we try to describe as artistic. Oh, you put that together in an artful manner. You made it make sense in this context. So that takes refinement, and that has to the person that puts it together in an artful manner need to be able to think about how these things work together, their basic elements and principles. Like the elements are being the makeup of it, and then the principles are how it can be used. So this is the rationalization for the elements and principles of design and art. Essentially you're arranging particles, and the medias then are used their constraints. That's what a media really is like, I've got this thing, and it can only be used certain ways. So to know the artwork and what each media means and how it can be used becomes the job of the artist. Like, you could draw with a graphite pencil or a pen a sunset, right? And the sunset would be focusing on the values, like this is where the light comes through, and this is where the shadows are, and blah blah blah, because that's the constraints of the media. Whereas like paint, particularly acrylic paint, you can get a lot of colors, and you can work them up, and you can layer them, and you can mix them and blend them and do all these things, but you don't have the precision that a pencil has. Don't believe me? Like, think about writing your name with a paintbrush as opposed to a pencil. My students get really angry when I'm like, put your name on the bottom right corner, and they're like, can I do it in a marker or a pen? And they're immediately thinking, man, painting my name with a paintbrush is hard. So these medias become the constraints of how we can communicate something, right? What is possible and what is not possible. So this becomes the language that you're exercising in the students is, how can I say this, or is this possible, and what are the possibilities? Because if you don't know these basic possibilities of the media or the communication of an idea, you can't do it. So really the purpose of art, as far as teachers and education goes, is to teach kids that it's not about creativity. We're not pulling something out of nowhere. We are developing an idea, and we are learning how to use these different medias and then putting them together into an artwork. Like, you are trying to communicate something. and you need to figure out what I'm communicating. So the subject matter, you need to figure out the media, what am I going to use to communicate this idea, and then what are the techniques that this can be using to illustrate, literally and figuratively, this idea. So the art teacher then is trying to teach, this is the media, this is what this thing can do, these are the techniques that you use with it to make it work, because these have been established, and these are the main ones. There's many other types of techniques that you can probably come up with, but I'm not going to worry about teaching all those. That's your job. You are researching and you're developing this, what is possible with this media. My job is to teach you the basic techniques so that you can get working with it. Like if you're teaching clay, you need to teach the principles of that. Like it can't be over a half an inch thick, otherwise you got to let it dry forever, and you need to poke a hole if it's a closed chamber so the moisture can get out, and like you need to score and slip, because if you just jam two pieces of clay together, they fall apart. So all these different medias become the means for students to make something, but they also need to be developed in their ability to formulate subject matter. What do you like? What are you interested in? What experiences have you had? What do you know about this subject matter, and how can you communicate this to others? What is happiness? What is sadness? What does this mean to you? Because ultimately, the second means of artwork, or educating students in art, is how do you feel? We're trying to work this out. I don't have the answers for you, but I'm guiding you. Your job is to figure out what this means to you. How do you communicate this? How do you view this idea? Because it's going to be different than my view. So having lessons where students have to end up at the same conclusion that you did is not correct. It's a misuse of art education. Yeah, it's great if you're showing techniques. Show me that you know how to do this technique. Yeah, that's great. But ultimately, the artwork becomes the duty of the student, because I want them to develop their own ideas. I want them to focus and reflect on their experiences and how they feel and understand this thing. So I don't like telling students what media they use. It's got to be questions. It's got to be, well, what do you think? I mean, this frustrates students to no end, because they want to be told the process. They want check by check by check, because it's measurable, and there's no way you can screw that up. But getting past the idea of it screwing up if this didn't come out the way that we didn't think about it. You know, it's not math. It's not we're always aiming for this answer because this is how the equation works. Subject matter plus media plus technique does not equal the same thing ever, if done correctly. But you need to know each part of these things before you can do that. So we're developing things. We're building a process to arrive at conclusions that are idiosyncratic for each individual, and therefore there has to be a divorce from the idea that there is one answer. So you got to educate for the process, not the idea of creativity, because creativity also comes from the idea that some people have it, some people don't. But ultimately, you're teaching thought, not what to think, but how. And there has to be a lot of freedom and a lot of choice in that. So the idea that creativity, and that some people have it and some people don't, and that it's only for the gifted few, is a fallacy that art education in particular must dispel. We're teaching process and progress. So this becomes the all-consuming purpose of the art educator, is to teach kids to play around with media, to figure out on their own what this means, so that when they go into life and they're faced with these situations, they're able to recognize, all right, here's the context, here's my limitations, these are my choices, which choice is going to work best? And that's a lifelong endeavor. But in education, we need to teach how to teach students how to think on their own. And that doesn't mean like I need to teach you in a didactic, like controlling way, this is how your brain needs to think, but to be reflective on what these choices mean and will result in. Make good choices. So, getting off the topic of creativity and getting back to the ideas of progressive education and developmental education. There is no such thing as creativity. Only God can do that. Only God can do that. Do more, do better.